The town of Dry Creek had seen its share of rough sights. Dust storms that blinded for days, cattle drives that thundered like storms across the land, and lawmen dragging in half-starved outlaws. But on that blazing afternoon, something heavier than dust and heat settled over the main street. A wagon rolled in, iron wheels groaning under the weight of its human cargo. The wooden cage at the back rattled with every rut in the road, and within it sat men and women bound in chains. James Whitlock, a widowed rancher with sun-browned skin and shoulders broad from years of work, reined his horse to a stop just outside the general store. His 8-year-old daughter, Clara, perched beside him on the wagon bench, squinted at the scene unfolding. Her little fists clutched at his sleeve as the cage drew closer. Through the bars, she spotted a woman slumped against the side, wrists shackled, face hidden beneath tangled hair. Her dress was little more than rags, torn and stained, clinging to her frame as if even the fabric wanted to let go. The driver cracked his whip, barking at the prisoners to sit straight. The chains clinked and echoed, a cruel rhythm beneath the laughter of onlookers. The townsfolk gathered quickly, merchants stepping out of shops, ladies whispering behind gloved hands, cowboys spitting tobacco into the dirt. An auction was coming. Everyone knew the signs. Clara's voice was small, trembling, but clear enough to slice through James's hardened exterior. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging his arm again. "Is she dying?" James looked at his daughter. Her eyes, bright, tender, untouched by the bitterness of the world, were fixed on the frail figure in the wagon. The woman barely moved, her chest rising shallowly, her lips cracked and colorless. For a long moment, James didn't answer. He had seen plenty of dying folks in his time, but something in Clara's tone struck him like a blow. He couldn't lie to her, but he couldn't tell her the truth either. Not yet. "Don't look too hard, Clara," he said softly, trying to guide her gaze away. "Some things ain't meant for young eyes." But Clara didn't turn away. Instead, she leaned closer, her brow furrowed in the way her mother's once did before she passed. "But she looks so sad, Daddy, like she don't got nobody." James shifted in his seat, uneasy. He told himself it wasn't his concern. Those prisoners had made their choices, or at least that's what the law claimed. Yet when his eyes fell back on the woman, he saw something different, not the defiance of a criminal, nor the wildness of an outlaw. He saw emptiness, like a flame that had been smothered too many times and had almost gone out. And for reasons he couldn't name, that image gnawed at him. The wagon rolled past, its shadows stretching across James and Clara like the long arm of fate. Dust swirled in its wake, and the murmurs of the crowd thickened. Soon, the auctioneer would climb his block, and those souls would be bought and sold as if they were cattle. Clara pressed her cheek against James's arm, her voice nearly breaking. "Please, Daddy, don't let her die." James swallowed hard, the words sticking in his throat. He was just a rancher, a father doing his best to raise a little girl without a mother. He didn't need trouble. He didn't need a stranger in chains, a burden he hadn't asked for. And yet, as he looked down at Clara, her small face etched with fear and hope all at once, he knew the moment had already marked him. For the first time in a long while, James felt the stirrings of something he thought he'd buried with his wife, the impossible urge to save someone who could not save themselves. The woman in chains hadn't spoken a word, but already she had changed the course of their lives. The town square of Dry Creek was buzzing like a hive stirred from its nest. Word had spread quickly that a wagon load of prisoners had arrived, and already the auction block stood ready in front of the sheriff's office, a crude platform of planks and nails, but sturdy enough to display goods. James Whitlock stood with Clara at his side, holding her small hand as she clung tightly, her eyes darting nervously from face to face. She had never seen such a gathering before, not for cattle or horses, and certainly not for people. Yet here they were, ranchers with coin pouches clinking, prospectors fresh from the hills, and even ladies in bonnets who looked on as though curiosity excused their presence. The auctioneer, a tall man with a gut straining against his vest, swaggered up onto the block. His booming voice carried easily, practiced from years of peddling everything from saddles to mules. "Ladies and gents, we got ourselves a fresh lot today. Strong stock, ready for work. Men fit for the fields, women fit for the kitchens. You won't find better deals this side of the territory," the crowd murmured, eager and impatient. The driver of the wagon unlatched the back and prodded the prisoners forward with a stick. One by one, they stumbled onto the stage, their chains rattling as they lined up. James's jaw tightened at the sight. He wasn't a man to meddle in other folks' business, but there was something ugly about seeing human beings paraded like cattle. He'd seen it before, but never with Clara beside him, never through her innocent eyes. Then she appeared. The woman Clara had asked about, the one who seemed ready to collapse in the wagon, was half dragged, half carried up the steps. She staggered, her bare feet scraping against the wood. Her hair fell in a dark curtain across her face, hiding her expression, but James could see how thin she was, how every movement seemed to cost her more strength than she had left. "Here we got ourselves a stubborn one," the auctioneer called out with a laugh, gripping her arm and yanking her forward. She winced but made no sound. She's had her troubles, aye, but she's still young. Strong bones, plenty of use left if you know how to handle the wild sort. Who'll start the bidding? The crowd chuckled, muttered, and eyed her the way men do when they see something broken they might fix, or break further. Clara's grip on James's hand tightened until her little knuckles went white. She tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, "Daddy, it's her. Don't let them take her. Please." James's heart thudded. He stared at the woman and something twisted inside him. She didn't look dangerous. She didn't even look alive, not fully. She looked like someone who had been beaten down so far she didn't believe she could stand again. Bids started low, a few coins tossed out carelessly. Men laughed, making crude jokes about her usefulness. The auctioneer smirked, raising the price slowly, teasing the crowd. The woman didn't lift her head, didn't resist. She simply stood there, a ghost in chains, waiting for her fate to be decided by strangers. Clara's whisper came again, breaking through James's hesitation. "Daddy, you said we're supposed to help people." Mama would have helped her. I know she would. The mention of his late wife struck James harder than any fist could. He remembered her voice, her kindness, the way she always found compassion where others found judgment. And here was their daughter echoing her mother's heart. Before James could think better of it, his voice rang out across the crowd. "I'll take her." The murmurs fell silent for a moment. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked, surprised, then grinned wide, smelling profit. "Ah, fine choice, Mr. Whitlock." "A fine choice indeed. Do I hear any challengers?" "No. Going once." "Going twice." The hammer struck the block with a sharp crack. "Sold!" The woman was his now, though James didn't feel triumph. Instead, he felt the weight of stares boring into his back. Some looked shocked, others amused, a few disgusted. He didn't care. He looked down at Clara, who was smiling for the first time since they arrived. And he knew there was no turning back. The woman raised her head slightly, just enough for James to see her eyes beneath the tangle of hair. For the briefest second, something flickered there, something fragile like a dying ember catching a breath of wind. Hope, or maybe disbelief. Then her gaze dropped again. James tightened his grip on Clara's hand. He hadn't just bought a stranger. He had bought trouble. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would define not just the woman's future, but his own. The ride back to the Whitlock Ranch was quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't peace, but something heavier. The newly purchased woman sat in the back of James's wagon, shackled still, though the driver had left her a length of chain long enough to sit upright. She didn't speak, didn't look up, didn't acknowledge Clara's shy glances. The rattle of iron links was the only sound she made, and to James, it echoed like an accusation. Clara sat beside her father on the bench, holding her rag doll in her lap. Every so often, she would peek over her shoulder at the figure in chains, her small face clouded with worry. "Daddy," she whispered once, "she doesn't look scary at all." James grunted, his eyes fixed on the road. Don't mean others won't think she is, and he was right. When they pulled into the ranch yard, the men working the corral stopped what they were doing. Hammers stilled, ropes hung slack, and more than one mouth fell open. "What in blazes is that?" muttered Hank, the foreman, wiping sweat from his brow. "Boss, tell me you didn't bring home one of them convicts." James climbed down, jaw tight. "She's here now. That's all you need to know." "That's all?" Hank barked a humorless laugh. "You expect the boys to work side by side with her? You know what folks'll say when they hear—" His voice dropped low. "You're asking for trouble, James." Another ranch hand spat into the dirt. "Ain't right, boss. A woman like that don't belong here." Clara, still clutching her doll, marched right up to them, chin jutting out like her mother's had when she was riled. "She's not a thing." "She's a lady. Daddy said so." The men exchanged uneasy looks. No one wanted to argue with the boss's little girl, but their scowls said plenty. James helped the woman down from the wagon. She staggered, nearly falling, and he caught her by the elbow. She jerked at the touch, flinching like a cornered animal, but didn't pull away completely. He guided her toward the small cabin at the edge of the yard, the one that had been empty since his brother moved on. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and old wood. The bed frame stood bare, the table scarred from years of use, but it was shelter. 4 walls and a roof. James unhooked the chains and set the key on the table, close enough for her to see, but not so close that she'd think he was pushing her. "You're not a prisoner here," he said gruffly. "Rest if you need." "Food'll be brought." She stared at him, eyes wide and guarded, but made no move to speak. Only when Clara slipped her rag doll onto the table, placing it gently in front of the woman, did something flicker across her face. Not quite a smile, but a softening, however brief. When James stepped back outside, Hank was waiting, arms crossed. "Boss," he said low, "you're making a mistake. That woman'll bring nothing but ruin. Folks will talk. Some won't just talk." James looked over the yard, his ranch, the men he trusted, and finally toward the cabin where the woman now sat in silence. "Maybe so," he admitted. "But she's here now. My word stands." Hank shook his head and walked off, muttering under his breath. That night, James sat on the porch with Clara curled against his side, the stars sharp and cold above. He couldn't shake the weight pressing on him, the whispers of his men, the eyes of the town, the unknown past of the woman in the cabin. He knew he had invited division into his home, and it was only a matter of time before the cracks widened. But then Clara yawned and murmured sleepily, "She's safe now, Daddy. You saved her." James looked toward the cabin. Its single lanty. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. The woman, still nameless in James's mind, kept mostly to herself inside the small cabin. She moved like a shadow, silent, watchful, and always on guard. If one of the ranch hands walked too near, she shrank back as if expecting a blow. If Clara brought her a piece of bread or a jar of milk, she accepted it with trembling fingers, but never spoke. James watched from a distance, torn between patience and frustration. He wasn't a man who understood women's hearts, even in the best of times, and this was far from that. He only knew she looked less like a person and more like a ghost. On the 3rd morning, Clara came running to the porch where James was mending tack. She held something folded in her hands, a dress. "Daddy," she said breathlessly, "can we give this to her? Please?" James took the garment, frowning. It was one of Martha's old dresses, his late wife's, simple, faded blue, but clean and whole. He hadn't touched it in years. It carried memories that still stung when he let himself think too long on them. He opened his mouth to say no, to remind Clara that it wasn't proper, that the woman might not even care. But then he caught the hope in his daughter's eyes, the same hope that had driven him to bid for a stranger on the auction block. Slowly he nodded. Together they walked to the cabin. Clara knocked gently before pushing the door open. The woman sat on the edge of the bed, her back straight, her eyes wary. Chains no longer bound her, but she still carried herself as though invisible shackles weighed her down. James placed the dress on the table. "For you," he said simply. "Figured you could use something better than rags." The woman's eyes flicked from the garment to James, then back again. Her lips parted as though she might speak, but no sound came. She only stared at the fabric as if it were something foreign, something she didn't deserve to touch. Clara darted forward, lifting the dress and holding it up with a proud grin. "See? It's pretty. You'll look nice in it." The woman's shoulders trembled. She reached out slowly, hesitantly, and brushed her fingers over the cloth. It was such a small thing, a threadbare dress, but to her, it might as well have been spun from gold. Tears welled in her eyes, though she quickly turned her face away so they wouldn't see. James cleared his throat, uneasy with the rawness of the moment. "You'll need a name, too. Can't keep calling you woman or girl." The words hung in the air. A name. It was a gift greater than cloth, greater than shelter. Names carried weight, identity, a sense of belonging. The woman looked at him then. Truly looked. Her dark eyes searching his face. "Anna," James said after a moment, the name rolling off his tongue unbidden. It had been his mother's name, steady and strong, yet gentle. "That'll be your name if you'll have it." The woman, Anna now, let out a shuddering breath. She clutched the dress to her chest, as if afraid it would vanish if she loosened her grip. Her lips moved, forming the faintest whisper. "Anna." James felt something shift inside him, though he couldn't explain what. For the first time since she'd come into his care, Anna wasn't just a shadow or a burden. She was a person again, fragile, yes, but human. Clara clapped her hands, delighted. "See, Daddy? She's not sad anymore. She's Anna." James managed a small smile, though it was tinged with heaviness. He knew one dress and a name couldn't erase the chains from her past, but it was a start. That night, when Anna stepped out of the cabin wearing the blue dress, even the ranch hands fell quiet. She still carried herself cautiously, her eyes wary, but she looked different. Not whole, not yet, but no longer invisible. And James, watching her under the fading light of the setting sun, realized he had given her more than cloth and a word. He had given her dignity. And in doing so, he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Hope. Glowing faintly in the window. He wasn't sure if saved was the right word. But for better or worse, the woman was under his roof, and that meant she was his responsibility. A house divided, it might be, but it was his house, and he intended to stand by his choice. For a time, it seemed as if things might steady. Anna wore the blue dress each day, carefully washing and mending it at night, as if she feared it might be taken from her. She moved more freely around the ranch, carrying water, sweeping the cabin, even feeding the chickens when Clara tugged her hand insistently. To an outsider, she might have looked almost ordinary, but James could see it. The shadows that clung to her like smoke. At night, those shadows grew thickest. The first time it happened, James was dozing in his room when a scream cut through the silence. It wasn't Clara. He knew his daughter's cries. This was deeper, rawer, the kind of sound that made a man's blood run cold. He bolted upright, snatched the lantern, and hurried to the small cabin. Anna sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, trembling so violently the frame shook beneath her. Her hair clung damp to her face, her eyes wide and wild. The scream had died to ragged sobs, but the terror in her expression was unmistakable. When James stepped inside, she recoiled, pressing herself into the corner. "Don't!" she rasped, voice hoarse, broken. "Don't touch me." James froze, the lantern casting uneasy shadows across the bare walls. He had no intention of laying a hand on her, but the fear in her eyes struck him like a blow. She wasn't here in this cabin. Her mind was trapped somewhere else, some memory that refused to let her go. Clara, woken by the commotion, padded in barefoot, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" she whispered, then saw Anna curled in the corner. Without hesitation, Clara ran forward, ignoring James's outstretched arm. She climbed onto the bed and wrapped her little arms around Anna's shaking frame. "Shh," Clara whispered, her voice soft and steady in a way far beyond her years. "It's okay. You're safe. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Daddy won't let them." Anna stiffened, caught between flinching and collapsing. Then, slowly, her sobs broke into hiccuping gasps. She lowered her forehead against Clara's small shoulder, clutching at the girl like a lifeline. James stood helpless in the doorway, lantern in hand, feeling both useless and humbled. He couldn't reach Anna in the way his daughter could. The nightmares came often after that. Some nights, Anna shouted words James couldn't understand, fragments of her past spilling into the dark. Other nights, she thrashed so hard James feared she'd harm herself. He never crossed the room, never tried to hold her still. He knew instinctively that touch was not what she needed. Instead, he left the lantern burning outside her door and stayed close enough to hear. Clara, more often than not, would sneak in and curl beside Anna until sleep claimed them both again. In daylight, Anna rarely spoke of it. Her eyes would linger on the horizon as if measuring how far freedom stretched, then drop quickly whenever James caught her gaze. She kept her distance, polite but guarded, as though waiting for the moment he revealed himself to be no different from those who had chained her. James didn't press her. He mended fences, drove cattle, kept food on the table, steady work that required no words. But every night, when the ranch quieted and the stars came out, he wondered about the horrors carved into Anna's silence. What had been done to her? Who had decided her life was worth so little they could bind her and sell her? One evening, after another nightmare left her trembling in the yard, James found her staring at the lantern light as though it were the only solid thing in the world. For the first time, she spoke without prompting. "They took everything," she whispered, voice shaking. "Even my name. When you said Anna, I almost didn't believe you meant me. But it's mine now, isn't it?" James nodded, his throat tight. "It's yours." "Always was. I just gave it back." Anna looked at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening in the lantern glow. Then she turned away, silent again. But something in her shoulders seemed lighter, as though a chain had loosened, if only by a link. The shadows still lingered. They would for a long time. But now, at least, Anna wasn't fighting them alone. By the time summer began to press its heat across the valley, the Whitlock Ranch had settled into a fragile rhythm. Anna still carried the weight of her silence, but she was no longer just a shadow on the edge of the yard. James would often catch glimpses of her working, sweeping the porch, tending the chickens, hanging laundry alongside Clara. She never asked to help, never assumed a place, but when a task was left undone, somehow her quiet hands had finished it. At first, the ranch hands didn't know what to make of her. Some muttered, others looked away, a few grumbled about her presence. But work had its way of softening even the sharpest objections. When Anna patched a torn shirt or set out water buckets in the field without being asked, the muttering lessened. She still avoided them, keeping her eyes lowered, but the hostility that once crackled in the air like dry brush before a fire began to dim. The change came one evening over supper. James and Clara were at the kitchen table, the smell of beans and cornbread thick in the air. Anna had cooked the meal, a fact James hadn't expected, but the food was warm, hearty, and seasoned with a care that surprised him. He had called Clara to wash up, and when the little girl bounded in, chattering about the day's chores, Anna had already set the plates. But when James and Clara sat down, Anna retreated to the corner, folding her hands neatly in her lap. She sat straight like a servant waiting for orders, her eyes fixed on the floor. James frowned, setting down his fork. "Ain't you gonna eat?" Anna shook her head quickly as if the very idea were dangerous. "No," she murmured. "I'll wait." Clara blinked at her, puzzled. "But you made it." "You have to eat too." Anna only gave a small shake of her head. She seemed ready to fade into the shadows again, content to be unseen. James's jaw tightened. He understood, perhaps more than she realized. He'd seen the way she still flinched at sudden sounds, the way she hesitated before taking anything for herself, as though she believed she had no right. His chest tightened with a mix of anger and pity. He leaned back in his chair, his voice firm but not unkind. "Anna, sit!" She looked up, startled, her dark eyes wide. I said sit," James repeated, this time softer. He gestured to the empty chair beside Clara. "This is my table. Ain't nobody here above or below another. You cooked it? You'll eat it. With us." For a long moment, Anna didn't move. Her hands twisted in her lap, her breathing shallow. Then Clara stood, marched over, and tugged Anna gently by the hand. "Come on," she said with all the authority of an 8-year-old hostess. "Your family now. Family sits together." Something broke then. Not loudly, not in any way James could put into words, but Anna's eyes filled, shimmering with tears she fought to hold back. Slowly, almost fearfully, she lowered herself into the chair. The first bites were hesitant, as though she expected the food to be snatched away. But when no one said a word except Clara's cheerful chatter, the tightness in her shoulders eased. James noticed how carefully she chewed, how she held the spoon as though it had once been a weapon instead of a tool. And then, barely, briefly, her lips curved in the smallest of smiles. For James, the moment struck deep. He realized it wasn't just about food or a seat at a table. It was about what the table represented: belonging, equality, a place in the world where she wasn't chained, silenced or set apart. When supper ended, Anna whispered something so soft James almost missed it. "Thank you." It was the first voluntary word she had spoken directly to him since she'd arrived. Clara beamed. "See, Daddy? She likes it here." James nodded, though the lump in his throat made speaking difficult. He knew there was still a long road ahead, shadows that couldn't be banished with one meal. But for the first time, he believed Anna might truly find a place, not just under his roof, but in his family. And for a man who had thought his home forever broken by loss, the thought stirred something warm and unfamiliar, the feeling that perhaps it wasn't just Anna who was finding a place at the table. Perhaps it was him, too. By mid-autumn, the ranch had found a kind of uneasy peace. Anna worked steadily, her quiet presence felt in every corner of the homestead. Bread cooling on the sill, Clara's hair brushed and braided neatly, clothes washed and folded before anyone had to ask. Though she rarely raised her voice, she had woven herself into the rhythm of the household. But peace inside the ranch didn't mean peace outside it. Dry Creek was a small town, and small towns have long memories and sharp tongues. Word of James Whitlock's purchase had spread quickly. How he'd outbid others for a convict woman, how he'd brought her into his home instead of selling her off. Men at the saloon whispered about what he wanted with her. Women at church exchanged knowing looks, muttering about corruption and sin. The sheriff, a tired man with too much on his plate, had pulled James aside once and muttered, "You're stirring up dust, better left settled." James ignored most of it. He'd never cared much for gossip. But the day came when he couldn't ignore it any longer. He rode into town for supplies, Clara skipping along beside him. Anna had insisted on staying behind. She never liked the stairs, but James had caught the way her hands twisted in her skirt when he saddled the horse, as if she feared what might happen in his absence. At the general store, James loaded flour, salt, and sugar onto the counter. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with sharp eyes, cleared his throat. "Heard tell you got that woman living with you still," he said casually, though his tone carried a barb. "Dangerous sort, they say. Folks are wondering what you're thinking, bringing her under your roof with a little girl around." James's jaw tightened. "She's under my protection." That's all anyone needs to know. The shopkeeper gave a thin smile, but James could see the judgment simmering in his eyes. As he gathered his goods, 2 men lounging near the barrels spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Reckon Whitlock's lost his senses," one drawled. "Or maybe he just wanted himself a woman cheap," the other snickered. Clara's hand slipped into James's, her small fingers trembling. James turned, fixing the men with a glare so cold it froze their smirks in place. "Say another word, and you'll be chewing teeth for supper," he said evenly. The room went quiet, but the whispers didn't stop. That evening, Hank came to James with worry in his eyes. "Boss, I heard some of the town boys talking. They're saying Anna don't belong here, that they'll set things right if you won't. Might be just talk, but I don't like the sound of it." James felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had known there'd be trouble, but hearing it laid plain was different. Still, he only nodded. "Let 'em come. They'll find I'm not so easy to scare." The trouble came sooner than he expected. One night, just as the moon climbed high, barking dogs roused James from sleep. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch. Shadows moved at the edge of the yard, 3, maybe 4 men. Faces hidden, voices low, the gleam of metal in their hands. Anna's cabin door creaked open. She stood in the frame, pale in the lantern light, fear stark in her eyes. She didn't cry out, didn't run, just stood frozen, as though she'd been waiting for this moment all along. James leveled the rifle, his voice ringing clear across the yard. "You boys picked the wrong house. She's under my roof. My name. My protection. You want her, you'll have to step over me, and I promise you won't get far." The night held its breath. Then, slowly, the shadows slunk back into the dark, muttering curses under their breath. When silence returned, James lowered the rifle. Anna still stood in the doorway, trembling. For a long moment, their eyes met. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. Disbelief that someone had stood for her, and something more fragile beneath it. Trust beginning to take root. But James knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The town wasn't done with its judgment, and neither was fate. After the night of the confrontation, something shifted in the air at the ranch. The men who had come skulking in the dark had been turned away, but their threat lingered like smoke after a fire. James doubled his watchfulness, keeping the rifle close, while Clara, oblivious to the gravity of it, chattered happily about how Daddy scared the bad men off. But for Anna, the moment left a deeper mark. She had lived her whole life believing that no one would ever stand between her and danger. Men had traded her like cattle, punished her without reason, and taught her that trust was a weapon to be used against her. Yet here was James, a man who had no obligation, planting himself between her and a mob with nothing but steel resolve. She didn't know what to do with that. For days afterward, she found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The way he moved through chores, the way he knelt to Clara's height, to braid her hair with clumsy fingers, the quiet patience with which he worked leather at the table in the evenings. He wasn't a perfect man. His face was weathered with lines of sorrow, his voice often curt, his hands scarred. But he was steady. And steadiness was something she had never known. One evening, after Clara had gone to bed, Anna lingered at the table instead of retreating to her small room. James sat across from her, oiling his rifle, the lamplight catching the planes of his face. The silence stretched until she forced words past the lump in her throat. You risked yourself," she said softly, her voice rough from disuse. James glanced up, meeting her eyes without flinching. "You're under my roof. That makes you my responsibility." Her hands clenched in her lap. "That's what they all said before, responsibility, duty, but when it suited them, they sold me. Beat me, left me to rot." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he set the rifle aside and leaned forward. "I don't know what was done to you, Anna. I don't need to know unless you want me to. But I'm not them. And I don't break my word." The simplicity of his tone cracked something inside her. No grand promises, no pity, just plain truth. Her throat burned, but the words spilled out anyway. "I was 16 when they sold me the first time," she whispered, staring at the table. "My own kin. Said I was a burden, that no man would want me except for coin." From there, it was one chain after another. Work camps, hands that hurt, faces that lied. Every time I thought I'd found someone decent, they proved worse than the last. Until I stopped believing decent existed. Her voice faltered. Shame coiled in her belly, expecting him to recoil, to look at her as all the others had, with disgust or scorn. But James didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "Then maybe it's time you saw what decent looks like." She lifted her gaze, startled. His eyes were steady, not soft with pity, not burning with desire, just firm like bedrock. It frightened her more than cruelty ever had, because it meant he might be telling the truth. That night, when she lay down, Anna found herself weeping quietly into the pillow, not from pain, but from the strange weight of hope pressing against her chest. In the days that followed, she began to test the edges of trust. She asked James questions about ranch work. She laughed once when Clara insisted she wear a flower crown made of wild daisies. She even sang a lullaby haltingly when Clara begged for a bedtime song. her own voice startling her with how long it had been locked away. The walls she had built around her heart were high and thick, but a small crack had opened. And through it light began to seep in. Winter came hard that year. The wind swept across the plains like a living thing, howling at the windows, rattling the barn doors, and sending snow curling into drifts higher than Clara's head. The Whitlock ranch hunkered down, its hearths burning day and night, its people busy with the endless work of survival. For Anna, winter brought an unexpected kind of belonging. She had learned the rhythm of the house and found a strange peace in small tasks, kneading bread, mending socks, teaching Clara how to plait rope for play. James still kept his distance in many ways, never pressing her with questions, but she felt his presence like the steady heat of a fire, not overwhelming, not demanding, but constant. Yet even peace has its trials. It happened one evening when James was away on a supply trip. The storm had passed, leaving a brittle calm. Clara was restless, darting between the barn and the house, her laughter ringing across the yard. Anna, for once, had let herself relax, humming softly as she folded laundry. But then came the scream. Anna rushed outside, heart lurching, and saw it, smoke rising from the barn roof. Somehow a lantern had toppled, straw igniting in a furious blaze. And inside, Clara's voice cried out, muffled and desperate. "Daddy! Anna, help!" Anna didn't think. She ran. The heat struck her like a wall as she pushed open the barn doors. Flames crackled and roared, eating up hay bales, licking the wooden beams overhead. Smoke clawed at her throat, stinging her eyes, but she pressed forward, following the sound of Clara's sobs. There, near a collapsed pen, the girl was trapped. A fallen beam pinned part of her skirt, flames creeping dangerously close. Clara's cheeks were streaked with soot and tears, her little hands struggling to free herself. "Anna," she sobbed. "I can't, you can," Anna said fiercely, dropping to her knees. She yanked at the beam, her palms burning against the wood, but it was too heavy. Gasping, coughing, she tore at Clara's skirt instead, ripping the fabric until the child stumbled free. "Hold on to me," Anna ordered, scooping Clara into her arms. The smoke was thick now, suffocating, the fire screaming as if determined to swallow them whole. She staggered toward the door, lungs screaming for air. Clara clung to her neck, whispering, "Don't let go, Mama. Please don't let go." The word, Mama, struck her with more force than the fire. It gave her strength she didn't know she had. With a final surge, she burst through the doors, collapsing into the snow outside, Clara pressed safely against her chest. By the time James thundered back on horseback, the barn was a skeleton of flames. He leapt from the saddle, terror in his eyes, only to find Clara shivering but alive in Anna's arms. "She saved me, Daddy," Clara choked, clinging to Anna. "She went into the fire. I called her Mama, and she came." James knelt beside them, relief breaking him down in a way Anna had never seen. He touched Clara's hair, then looked at Anna. His eyes said what his lips could not. Gratitude? Awe, something dangerously close to love. Anna, still coughing, still shaking, tried to hand Clara over, but the girl refused, burying her face against her chest. Anna froze, unsure how to respond. She had never been anyone's mama, never imagined she could be. Yet in that moment, with Clara's small arms clutching her and James's steady gaze fixed on her, she felt the truth settle deep inside. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was needed. She belonged. The barn was gone, but something new had been built in the fire's place, a bond stronger than chains. Stronger than the fire left scars across the Whitlock ranch, blackened timbers, the acrid smell of smoke, and the loss of the barn James had built with his own hands years ago. Yet, when the neighbors rode out the next morning, they didn't find despair. They found James hammering new posts into the ground, Anna hanging wet clothes on a line, and Clara trotting between them with a bucket far too big for her. The whispers, of course, had already begun. Some said the fire was a sign, God's punishment for James taking in a convict woman. Others whispered it was Anna herself who had started it, though no one dared say so to James's face. But for once, Anna didn't crumble under the weight of their judgment. She knew the truth. She had gone into the flames, and Clara had called her mama. That word had burned away more than smoke ever could. In the weeks that followed, the household settled into a deeper kind of harmony. James stopped keeping such careful distance. When he spoke to Anna, there was warmth in his tone, not just patience. When he looked at her, his eyes lingered. He no longer saw her as a burden to protect, but as a partner standing beside him. One cold evening, with Clara asleep and the fire snapping low in the hearth, James set aside his work and turned to Anna. "You know," he began slowly, "I never meant to change your life when I stepped in that day at the auction. I just knew my girl couldn't watch someone die in chains. But it's not duty that keeps me standing here now. It's choice." Anna froze, her sewing needle poised in midair. For a moment, fear gripped her. She had heard promises before, sweet words that soured into cruelty. But James's voice was different, plain and steady as always. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I sent to the courthouse. Had your indenture dissolved. Whatever chains you carried, legal or otherwise, they're gone. You're free, Anna, free to walk away if that's what you want." Her breath caught. She had dreamed of freedom once, but by the time she had been sold the second and third time, the word had become meaningless. Freedom had always been an illusion, dangled just out of reach. And now, placed in her hands, it felt heavier than iron. "You're saying I could go?" "Anywhere," she whispered. James nodded. "Anywhere. You don't owe me. You don't owe this ranch, not even Clara, though she'll miss you something fierce. If you stay, it'll be because you choose it, not because you were forced." Anna stared at the paper in her trembling hands. She thought of the years stolen from her, the chains that had cut into her wrists, the nights she had curled up and wished she could simply vanish. She thought of Clara's arms around her neck, of the little girl's voice calling her mama in the fire. She thought of James, standing rifle in hand in the moonlight, defying the world to protect her. Slowly, she set the paper down on the table. "I don't want to go," she said, her voice steady for the first time. "For so long I thought all I wanted was to escape, but now I've found something worth staying for." James's expression softened, relief flickering across his features. He didn't move to embrace her, didn't press for more. He simply nodded, as though sealing an unspoken vow. Later that night, Clara padded sleepily into the room, rubbing her eyes. She climbed into Anna's lap, curling up as though it were the most natural place in the world. James watched them from his chair, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. And for the first time in many years, Anna felt whole. Not a captive, not a burden, not a number, a woman with a name, a mother to a child, a partner to a man who kept his word. The chains were gone. In their place was something stronger, love, trust, and a new life she had once believed impossible.